ancient sacred text is Psalm 32. Happiness comes from having your rebellion taken away, from having your failure completely recovered. Happiness from Yahweh, not counting your mistakes and having nothing to hide. As long as I kept my stubborn silence, my bones grew weak because of my constant complaints. Day and night your hand was heavy upon me, my strength was sapped by a summer's heat. Finally, I admitted my sin to you and stopped hiding my guilt. I said, I confess my rebellion, Yahweh, and you took away the guilt of my sin. That's why people of faith everywhere should pray to you. They'll find you. Even when the flood begins rising, it will never touch them. You are my hiding place. You'll protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of freedom. I'll teach you and show you the way you should walk. I will counsel you and keep watch over you. Be wise. Don't be like horses and mules who need to be harnessed with bit and bridle before they'll come to you. Wrongdoers are prone to many sorrows, but those who trust in Yahweh are surrounded with unfailing love. Be glad in Yahweh and rejoice, you who love justice. Exult, you upright of heart. Holy wisdom, holy word.
Thanks be to God.
Please be seated.
Right. Well, yes, so it is the first Sunday in Lent, and we are exploring this theme together of mending forgiveness and weaving solidarity. And to me, this question has a lot to do with how are we called to be in community together? What do we do when we hurt each other and when we harm each other? Not just, this community, but our neighbors and our wider neighbors, our world. And I think that forgiveness has a lot to do with this, and today I'm going to try to dig into this concept a little bit. But as is our way, I'm going to open with a story. So I'm a little, it's like one of these, like heart beating stories. I'm going to take, should we do the Yahweh breath prayer? Those of us who remember it? Okay, let's do it together. One more time. Thank you. That was from our previous season together, if that was your first time praying that prayer with us. So, prior to living in Oregon, Brian and I have lived in Oregon for 12 years. I grew up in Minnesota, and I went away from Minnesota for undergrad and seminary, and lived again in Minnesota for 5 years, where I worked as a community organizer at an interfaith social justice advocacy coalition. And my final year in that role, I felt like I was starting to kind of step into my power a little bit more. I was like kind of cutting my chops. We had a campaign on payday lending, a bill moving through the legislature, and it was an idea that had come out of some congregations in our coalition that were doing some really great grassroots organizing. And we had national support coming from, a coalition in DC that had come in they sent a staff person to help us and help us think through strategy. And it was my role to receive this staff person and make them feel welcome. And at home in Minnesota, they were visiting us for several days. And after a few days, it was a Saturday, and I remember this very clearly. Brian and I were at a local coffee shop and doing some work. He was in medical school at the time, so he had a lot of work to do. and I don't know what I was doing. I was probably hanging out doing something. It's a Saturday. I got a text from this colleague who was in town asking what I was up to. And I said, well, I'm hanging out with my partner. What are you up to? Would you like to join us for dinner? Or, you're here from out of town. And the series of messages that I received from this colleague are not messages that I would repeat in polite company. They're not even messages that I would want to repeat in private company because they make my skin crawl. They were messages that were uninvited sexual messages that were very graphic and very lewd. Right, okay, so which we can, there's a whole thing about, Christianity and sexuality, that needs to be unpacked and deconstructed in itself. Let's put that over here. These ones were inappropriate. And it was really challenging for me at the time to figure out, what do I do about this? And I really blamed myself. I thought, maybe in some way I had led this person on. Had I invited these messages in some way? With Brian's support and another dear friend, I brought them to my boss, who was a mentor, is a mentor. And, I had been in the role for 5 years, and he had really brought me up and tended to my leadership. And when I brought him these messages, his response to me was something like, well, did you lead him on in some way? So there was that pain as well. So it reinforced my own fears. Then with more support from Brian and more support from my close ones, I brought the messages to our board chair, who at the time was the Reverend Peg Chamberlain, who's a minister and was head of the Minnesota Council of Churches. And she saw the messages, and she said, this is not your fault. And she took action. She sent the messages to this person's employer. She took action. She held my boss accountable. And he was removed from our campaign, and I never saw him again. I had heard kind of through the grapevine that he had lost his job. I felt bad about that. But that was that. My mentor and I never again returned to the same level of closeness. And I think that, never returned to the same level of closeness. And I'm going to return to talking about him a little bit more in a little bit. But essentially, what was lost was my sense of trust that he saw me as a capable person, and not through a lens of gender or seeing me as my body first, right? And what was lost is lost. We were able to move on in collegiality, but not with the same level of trust, not with the same level of connection. And I think that this question of forgiveness is a really key one. And I hope that this story helps and can continue to help us unpack this concept a little bit. So forgiveness is a heavy-laden concept in Christianity, right? Our modern sacred text today certainly packs a punch. But at the core of how we're called to be together in community and in Christian community as Christians, I think we've got to talk about forgiveness. Or rather, we need to talk about forgiveness and all of the other things and concepts that we have confused it with. reconciliation, redemption, restoration. These things are not the same thing as forgiveness, and this matters. So to understand it, I think there are kind of two broad things that I want to tease apart. One is grief, and one is power. So we'll start with grief, because at the heart of forgiveness is the acknowledgement that something has been lost. Something has been lost. Not only that, but something has been taken from us. If we are being asked to forgive, it's because someone needs to be forgiven because of some damage they have done or harm that they have caused. So not only grief, but rage, despair, trauma. If someone's asking us for forgiveness, we are grieving. So as I said, for me it was the illusion that my mentor saw me as fully trustworthy and capable. You might call it a loss of innocence or a loss of trust. But either way, whatever had been there was gone, and it wasn't coming back. Not to say something else couldn't be rebuilt in its place. But that what had been was gone. And this loss matters because there's something that our dominant culture, informed by the Christian concept of forgiveness, something in our dominant culture wants us to overlook these strong emotions of grief, of rage, of despair when we're talking about forgiveness. Forgive and forget, right? Move on. And this should trouble us. I don't think that we should laud a model of conflict resolution that allows someone who's caused harm to walk away without taking accountability. Not punishment, accountability. When I was in seminary, I remember a moment in a class very clearly when we were talking about the passage in 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love never fails. And the ways in which, for many generations and still today, this passage and others and the concept of forgiveness have been used to counsel people to remain in abusive relationships. We can see how that plays out in our collective as well. That when we forgive, when we stay in abusive relationships, when we stay in abusive systems and contexts without working for change, that's not forgiveness. Or, I don't know, let's keep going. Let's see. All right. So this dismissal of grief and rage, it points, I think, to power. So let's talk a little bit about power. I do think that the reason many people who can walk away from causing harm without taking accountability is because of the power that they hold. So this book, Forgiveness, this is the book that our modern sacred text reading comes from today. Matt Potts is a Presbyterian minister and is the chaplain at Harvard University, one of the chaplains there, and is also co-host of one of my favorite podcasts, Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. Okay, anyway. Thanks. We need a little lightness, right? But I was reading this book on the day that Alex Preddy was shot. And I was thinking about how his murderers, at least right now, are not being held accountable. Have they been arrested? Have they been charged? Have they even been asked to explain themselves? Have any of their peers or their colleagues who are terrorizing our communities and our neighbors all across our country and inside of our community been held accountable at all? Years ago, like I mentioned, I was told that the man who sent me the messages 12 years ago had lost his job. Quick Google search in preparing for this sermon revealed to me that yes, he was removed from that job. Yes, he did leave the organization that he worked for. However, he was given a promotion at the parent organization that ran the organization that he had worked for. I never received an apology from him or from the organization he worked with. I don't know that I wanted one, but what is the meaning of forgiveness when we don't have accountability? Should I forgive and forget? Should we forgive and forget? The deaths of people on the street, shot by our government in Minneapolis and here in Portland, people shot by our government, people taken out of their homes, taken out of their families, all across our country. Perhaps we've misunderstood the meaning of forgiveness. And I'm going to complicate a little bit, because there is a catch, and the catch is that none of us are innocent. None of us are innocent, and none of us are perfect. And all of us need grace. It's a much more difficult sermon for me to preach, a story about all the ways that I have lied or betrayed or cheated, or the ways that I've just plain been limited in my capacity or my empathy or my attention. I'm not up here telling those stories. Not today, anyway. Maybe, hopefully. That's also what community is for. I've tried to tell some of those stories too. But even among those of us who are relatively skilled interpersonally, we are all still complicit to the harm caused by simply existing here on this planet. Do you have a phone with you today? That phone contains minerals that were mined by extractive labor practices, by human beings somewhere who matter. Do we have a retirement account? I do. Our friend Skylar Halsey here calls me into accountability about how our retirement accounts keep us bound to capitalism. And even our so-called ethical retirement accounts, right, prompt us to collect our wealth instead of sharing it with people who need it right now. I don't have an answer for that, friends. I still have a retirement account. But I want to ask these questions together. I need to. Even just the default access to resources and opportunities that many of us in our different social locations here in this room receive due to the benefit of our race or our class or our gender, our neurological abilities, right? Our physical capabilities, our age, we benefit. The point is not we're perfect, we're innocent. The point is we need to let ourselves feel these truths and allow them to be painful. None of us, I don't think, wants to hurt other people in our heart of hearts. I really believe this. And I really believe that it actually does hurt a person when they cause harm. I think it causes all of us emotional distress or psychological trauma, both. And when this happens, we have a choice. I'm going to put it as a binary, but it's a spectrum. On one side, we can deny, we can numb, we can avoid. On the other side, we can accept this truth about ourselves, and we can repent, and we can ask for grace. So I think that this desire to cling to innocence, our goodness, in this context, it can damage our concept of forgiveness. And forgiveness can become a tool. Forgive and forget. Done. That kind of forgiveness can be a tool for reassuring our psyches, a way to smooth things over or stuff things down, and pretend like we've made things right when they're not actually right. And then when that happens, we lose the opportunity to restore a relationship. We lose the opportunity to heal. It's a spiritual healing, it's a relational healing, and a collective healing. And I think that what we're seeing in the world today is evidence of unhealed pain, trauma, violence that's been unacknowledged, that's been stuffed down at the collective level. But we do need forgiveness. And so this is where I think Matt Potts, he has some suggestions. So we're going to do a teeny bit of reconstructing today, and then I'll stop talking. But Matthew Potts suggests a way of reaccounting for forgiveness, maybe some repair, some mending of forgiveness. And he offers 3 pieces of insight that we can hold. One is to not think about forgiveness as a feeling, but to understand forgiveness as an action. Forgiveness as an action can then allow it to connect to what we do rather than what we feel. This allows us to still honor our grief, to honor our rage, to honor our despair, to allow for all of that and not have those feelings govern the choices that we make for how we operate in the world. So these 3 things go together. The first one is forgiveness is not a feeling. Number 2 is that forgiveness is not reconciliation. Often, forgiveness and reconciliation are used interchangeably. I think that's kind of the popular concept of it. But it's helpful. It's not helpful, that combining of the two for the purposes of repairing the harm done to forgiveness, right? It's not helpful to us to think of the two as the same thing. Instead, forgiveness is a commitment to non-retaliation. It is a commitment to forswearing vengeance, a commitment to resisting retribution, to nonviolence. It's resisting the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Matt Potts puts it this way: when bodies and lives are at risk, it seems to me that mere restraint is saintly enough. Mere restraint is saintly enough. Reconciliation in relationship invites intimacy in a way that forgiveness need not. We can offer forgiveness to somebody by simply saying, "You did this, a loss has taken place, and I do not wish that same loss upon you. And I will not take action for that same loss to happen to you. It is not a forswearing of accountability. It is a forswearing of revenge. Okay? And then the third is that forgiveness happens inside of time. Meaning we can't go back. There are certain kinds of harms that we can repay or repair, so to speak. If someone takes $5 from me, eventually they can give me those $5 back, maybe with some interest, whatever, and maybe we are able to repair. If somebody kills my brother, we don't get that back. But there is an assumption in this popular idea of forgiveness that somehow forgiveness can restore or erase the past of what's happened. And that's just magical thinking. Some harms can't be repaired. Alex Preddy is not coming back. Leon Ramos is always going to have been kidnapped when he was 5 years old. Always. So there's that acknowledgement. It brings us back to grief. Forgiveness and grief are interconnected. There's one last piece that I want to talk about, which is that forgiveness is not reconciliation, right? On a earthly, human-to-human level. But humans can receive grace from God and from ourselves. So I think there's a piece too of distinguishing between forgiveness offered between you and me and the forgiveness that we receive from the divine. The grace that we receive from the divine. And there's a certain kind of spiritual humility that I think can be really important when we can say, I simply can't offer you my emotional grace. But I know that God can. I can wish you no harm, and I can do no harm. So there's a piece of each of us individually, right? We need forgiveness. We need grace. We know this. Any of us who are alive and awake understand that we're flawed and we need it. But maybe it's not our job to offer it to each other every single time. Maybe that's not possible. Maybe we can leave that grace to God sometimes. So ultimately, stepping back as we turn toward Lent, forgiveness is one part. It's not an end of a healing process. It's one part of a non-linear process of restoration, of healing. It's a spiritual process, it's a communal process, and it's a material process. And it's one that really ought to challenge us to real action and to real accountability. The person who sent me these messages 12 years ago, I don't want a relationship with that person. I don't feel good about that person. But I do believe that he can change. I hope he has. And I believe that he can act in solidarity with me and with other survivors of workplace sexual harassment. So there is something about healing, forgiveness, solidarity, accountability, and action, right? That when we step back and we think about the broader fabric of the collective, there's some pieces that are interpersonal and some that are collective. And this person, although I may not need to offer him whatever, doesn't mean that he is lost. He's a human. who can still act in solidarity. And I hope he does. And honestly, so can we, right? We are all human. And I'm not telling you my stories right now of all the ways I'm human, but I needed to, right? Okay, so this Lent, we're going to talk about what it means to be in relationship with each other, how we manage apologies and accountability and repair. But for now, I want to invite all of us into 2 Lenten commitments that our hope is to keep coming back to whatever these commitments are each Sunday. And I invite you to one commitment of solidarity. So this could be whatever action. Maybe it's weekly, maybe it's daily. An act of solidarity toward liberation, toward collective liberation. You get to choose. That's what we're going to talk about in one-to-ones. That's one. Number 2 is a practice of grace for our own selves. What needs repairing in you? Because if we go out and we do the solidarity, but we're not looking at the places inside of ourselves that need that repair, it's incomplete, my friends. So 2 things. Practice of solidarity, practice of grace. Self-love, self-forgiveness, God's love, God's forgiveness. Okay? We're going to take 5 to 7 minutes. We're going to move into one-to-ones. If you are new to Salt and Light and Central Community, the worshiping community of the 2 of our congregations, after sermon, we turn to one another and we talk about what's come up for us. This is optional. If it's not for you today, you can sit, you can breathe, you can get coffee, you can stand in the rain. Some of us might want that. So it's optional, but it's an invitation to turn to one another and talk about these practices, and then we'll come back together and share them out, okay? Thank you.